Good morning, everybody. See how this goes, considering this is the first time I've ever given a sermon. I've only ever done an invitation before. And even at that, I was about 17, I think, 17 or 18, so it's been a while. My sermon title is Why. And you're probably asking why it's why. Because there's the end of the sermon. No, I wish. It'd be a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier. Actually, really, I probably have Lily and James to thank for this when they were over at the lot the other day. Because there was this little streak where they kept asking why everybody was doing everything, and I got to thinking about this earlier, later last night, trying to figure out how I wanted to streamline my thoughts, because the overall concept of this it's been on my mind for a while now, and it's why is it such a problem to ask why? We've been having this problem here ourselves. We start questioning things and asking, well, why this? Why does it work this way? Or why do we do this? Why do they say this? Could it be this way? Could it be that way? And you start asking why along the right vein, and you can get a lot of backlash. And really, that comes to a testament to the people, particularly leadership in this case in the church. They don't have the answers because they don't study. Or they've never really thought of it along that vein, and they don't like being questioned because they don't ever get asked why. People are afraid to ask. People get, especially in the audience and in the pews, like I said, you ask why along the right vein, and you're either going to get a runaround or you're going to get shut down. And if you really press it, Trent and Ron especially, if you ask them, and they're happy to share their stories, they can tell you some doozies, and it's a shame that people even act that way. So I'm going to jump in here with the scripture reading. I'm going to expand on it a little bit. I'm going to read 1 Peter 3:13 through 16. So get this whole thought here. Starts out in 13. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put in shame. I kind of picked this out just mostly because of probably here in 15, just picking out the always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you. It is our responsibility as Christians to be able to defend what we believe. So if somebody comes up and asks us why, we can give them the answer. If you don't have the answer, and I know I'm even this way, I can't remember every little nuance. I'm one who I more often remember the concept of something in a general area and where it's in, especially when it comes to biblical passages. Quoting things specifically is usually a lot harder for people. Some people I've known people who have concepts nailed, and they have a hard time remembering exactly where it's at. So we also have to be understanding in that it's okay to look at somebody and say, you know what, I don't remember exactly where this is, but it also opens a door for you to be able to talk with them again, be able to answer the why. Jump here to 2 Peter 2, starting in verse 14. Amazes me how polished Dad is at this after doing it for 20-something years. No, 30-something years. His age is showing. I can get away with that because he's not here. Okay, again, it's 2 Timothy 2, starting in verse 14. Remind them of these things and solemnly charge them in the presence of God not to wrangle about words, which is useless and leads to the ruin of the hearers. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. In this, I'm kind of wanting to draw out the concept, especially since it kind of goes along with there in 1 Peter 3, along this line of studying to show yourself approved. You've got to be able to know this stuff and be diligent. It's our responsibility to get into our Bible, open it up, and go through it. I would like to point something out along this line of scriptures, because this will probably come up 2 or 3 times, if I remember right, in some of the different passages after this sermon, is especially when you're reading in the New Testament, where it's talking about scriptures being studied. Generally speaking, it's actually referring to them being told to look through the Old, what we call the Old Testament. There's a lot of knowledge there in the Old Testament, especially if you start looking into things like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, some of these books where it's more general truths. We in the Church of Christ, and I've even heard this, not so much from Dad, because he's always taught us, ever since we were little, to just ask why. It's okay to ask. It's how you're going to learn. And if somebody doesn't have an answer, and they try to tell you something to do, you have every right to look at them and go, no. Just because you say something doesn't mean it's true. You better be able to back it up. And we also have the responsibility, again, that being kind of the theme of the lesson, we have to be able to back up what we tell each other. If we can't, it's just essentially words in the air. It doesn't matter. It'll fall on deaf ears. It's real easy to be looked at as kind of a hypocrite if you say one thing, can't back it up, and then especially if you lead into it and do something else. So as especially getting along into the avoiding worldly and empty chatter part of it, it just kind of expands on it. There is speech out there, as much as some of us probably don't want to hear it, that you shouldn't say. And it's not necessarily a specific word. Sometimes it's just going on and rambling about something. I hate to say it, but growing up, my sister would sometimes even be that way. She would fabricate these really fantastic stories just to say something. And every one of us learned that we had to look at her and go, Kaylee, no, it wasn't that way. I was there. Or, Kaylee, just stick with the truth, the simplicity of it. Growing up and seeing that, you learn real quick how to kind of read people along that line, especially when you get so used to it. But again, it's okay to look at somebody and say, why? Why are you doing this? Why do you believe that? And a good example of trying, let's see, back in the picture, I'm going to be going to Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 and 8. This here is kind of where God, after Moses has just passed, is commissioning Joshua to kind of spearhead this campaign into Israel and lead them. This kind of gives us a good example of the charge of an individual and the study habits they're supposed to have. So again, in Joshua 1, verse 6, reads, and I'm reading out of the New American Standard, it says, "Be strong and courageous." This is God talking directly to Joshua. "Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success." Now, granted, this is kind of an oddball case, especially, like I said, being God directly talking to Joshua, but the concept still remains the same. Even God talking to Joshua, who was Moses' hand-picked right-hand man, he already knew this. But again, God found it necessary for us to be able to read it, study day and night. This includes leadership. Leadership especially has a heavy weight on them because they're the ones standing up in front of everybody, telling everybody, essentially, what you're supposed to be doing. So you have a lot of people who look up to you. And again, if they come and ask you anything, It's your responsibility to be able to look at them and explain it. And again, if it's a concept you're not real sure about, it's your responsibility to go and study it. Our entire purpose, essentially, in life is to figure this stuff out. Fear God and keep His commandments. And the only way to do that is to find His Word and read it and follow it. Next thing I'll be jumping into, go back here to 2 Timothy chapter 3. I'll be reading 14 through 17. See if I can get here without pulling my book of Ephesians out. It seems to jump out of my Bible a lot. Okay, again, that's 2 Timothy 3, verses 14 through 17. You, however, continue in the things you have learned and become convinced of, knowing from whom you have learned them, and that from childhood you have known the sacred writings which are able to give you the wisdom that leads to salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. And if we were to go in and read, especially the whole context of this section here in Timothy, Paul is essentially telling Timothy, you've done good, you've been raised well. You wind up learning through here that particularly his mother and his grandmother are the ones who raised him. What did they raise him in? The Old Testament. And even Paul here in this direct letter to him, he even tells him directly, and we can pull this out for us, go back and read it. There's a lot, again, in the Old Testament where you're going to get the things on how to live your everyday life. Most of the New Testament takes up its time in essentially trying to transition from being a Jew and their way of life, the strict letter of the law, and transitioning them into a more free way and mindset in how they're supposed to be serving God, the way He intended it from the very beginning. So again, in order for them to have raised Timothy the way they did, one, it took him a mindset to actually want to do it. But also he had the examples. And we also know that his father was a Greek, and he doesn't hardly get any mention, so I have strong suspicion that Timothy's dad probably didn't hardly care an ounce for that, aside from essentially tolerating it from his wife. That's just kind of conjecture, but just in kind of study, it's kind of what you pick up in it. And kind of looking at this angle from Timothy's mom and grandma, I'm going to jump into, Proverbs 22:6. We're going to kind of go along this vein of parents' responsibility in this whole question of why, particularly pertaining to your kids. Because of all the things you're going to get asking you why the most, it's going to be your kids when growing up. That's kind of what I was saying about Lily and James there at the lot. I don't even remember what all they asked why about, but it was just rapid fire, one right after the other. And just looking at them and saying because does not work. They just ask why again, so you have to explain it. And then you have to explain that when they ask why. But it was just kind of funny. It's kind of fun because you don't get that stuff at the lot very often. Although you don't get much done when you're sitting there trying to talk to them, so that's just, it's all fun. Okay, again, it's Proverbs 22, verse 6. I'm trying to remember myself. Okay, this one's short, but again, Proverbs full of all kinds of good general truths. 22:6 reads, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And you know, I've seen a lot of people, especially being a preacher's son, you wind up getting a lot of this essentially directly in your face, because it's not like you can leave the room when somebody comes over to your house and wants to talk to your dad and you overhear a lot. It's the nature of it. It's funny the things you remember over the years. But you see a lot of this where there was one gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he wound up coming back to church after he was raised that way when he was young. And if I recall correctly, he was in his late teens, mid-20s, and just said he was done. But what's funny is, morally speaking, he essentially kept that same standard, aside from the fact that he ran a bar for a very long time. And by the time he was in his, I believe it was 70s, he decided to straighten his life out, and it wasn't a year later until he passed. So that's always been really important. But that was one of those, especially growing up there at Lawrence, that one always kind of stuck out in my mind because it kind of proves the proverb true. There's been plenty of other people I've seen over the years do the exact same thing. But we'll stick with that one for now. I'd like to move here to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. I like this one pretty good too. Okay, again, it's Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. Now, this is kind of just commandment directly to Israel as a whole. So I'll go ahead and read here, starting in 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. That doesn't sound too far of what we're commanded to do, does it? Funny, the commandment hasn't changed, and it's been, what, about 3,000 years or so ago? So, funny. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on your doorpost of your house and on your gates. Especially here in about verse 7. This one has always kind of reminded me, again, of how we've been raised. For as long as I can remember, whether it was driving home from Sunday morning service or the vacation Bible schools we would go to when we were little, or even today, there'll be times, especially at the lot and having the privilege to be able to actually work with my family, there's a lot of times we'll just be working on something and something will come to one of our heads and we're talking about it. It literally has become really a part of who we are to talk about this stuff. And I just always found it kind of interesting that God had to go so far as to command the Israelites to do this. When you're at the dinner table, do you talk with your kids? A lot of people don't. All they do is they come to church at the appointed times. If you're lucky, they'll come all 3 general services and, the 2 services and then the 2 studies. You're lucky if they do that. But anymore, all they do is just come on Sunday and then they go to their football games and whatever. And how often have they actually talked to their kids? Even my friends now, I talk to them and I've just come out and asked them, how was it when you guys were being raised? Because again, like I said, especially Jake and I, you can ask either of us, every day of our lives, this was it. We have always been taught, you're trying to serve God. If you want to do this, it's your choice, yes. But if you actually want to be in heaven, that end goal, you've got to learn this. You've got to live it. And you can be the light to others around you. So when they do come and ask you why, you can have the answer. But again, like I said, I've asked my friends, and it shocks me that people even raised in the church, they know nothing. Yeah, they know you're supposed to be baptized, but if you really press them into why, you're talking, even some people I know, my own age, mid-20s, they don't have a good answer. They were baptized when they're 14, 15, 16, some as early as 12. They don't have a clue. All they have is what's been ramrodded down their throat over the years, but they never really went to that point where they understood why. And then you really start conversing with people, and I've even heard this from people in their 40s, 50s. Growing up, they didn't sit down at the dinner table and talk. They didn't ever once look at the scripture and really get the whole picture of why you should be here amongst one another. They didn't even get the picture as to why you shouldn't go sleeping around. You want to see some interesting stuff on that? Start looking in some of Solomon's writings. You go to Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, there's warning after warning after warning of why you should choose the right friends, why you should devote yourself to study, why you shouldn't go around drinking with everybody, because you need to keep your mind clear. You cannot have a clear mind if you're inebriated. Can't happen. It's amazing to me. It would take me forever to go through even just Proverbs, going through a lot of this stuff. But again, it blows my mind that being raised in the church, my own friends, there was a lot of times there's nothing there. There is no substance, because when they asked why, their parents said because. Because I'm your dad, that's why. No, that's not good enough. You should know why. You should be able to explain to your kids, and fathers especially are charged with this. It is your responsibility as the head of the house to look at your son or your daughter and explain to them why or why not. They're going to ask. You better have a good answer. And then on top of it, it's also your responsibility to discipline them. So let's, on that line of the discipline, that kind of leads me here to Ephesians 6 and 4. 6 and verse 4. Because along that line of discipline, there is a fine line there as well. You can't go too far with it. You can push yourself and your kids to such a point that you can essentially provoke them to anger, which is what Ephesians 6 verse 4 quite literally says. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." How are you going to know what the discipline and instruction of the Lord is? You must study. You have to know what's in this. And the only way you're really going to know, you're going to have to go back to the Old Testament, because that's where all this information is. The reason it's not really expanded upon in the New Testament is simply because these are letters to Jews who already knew this stuff. They should have known. It was there for them for 1,500 years, not to mention the fact that it was just general truth to anybody who was willing to actually try to raise their family in the Lord prior to that, in the patriarchal age. So you have another warning here in Colossians chapter 3, verse 21. This is kind of along the same lines as provoking your kids. Colossians 3:21. "Fathers, do not exasperate your children, so that they will not lose heart." Again, you can press your kids, and I've seen this happen too. You kind of have the opposite ends of the way the pendulum swings, is you can try to be so strict that your kids will slip through your fingers as your grip tightens. You can't do that either. There is a happy medium. Believe it or not, you also have to let them make some mistakes, because that's life. You're going to make mistakes. It drives me nuts when I hear some of these preachers pounding on, well, actually, some of it's not even preachers. Some of it's just the average guy sitting in the pew. They're under this false assumption that you have to absolutely be perfect, and I can go years without sinning. That one blows my mind, because there's plenty of passages that say if you have that mindset alone and you dare let that off your lips, that you just committed one. So as that shows they don't actually study, because you can also read and not have a clue what it's saying. There's been plenty of people I've seen do that exact same thing. So again, along the lines of parents, and particularly fathers, you have your work cut out for you. So maybe one of these days I'll be there myself. Honestly, it's something that I always keep in the back of my head, because if I could even just do half as good a job as my parents did, I'd be happy. But even at that, again, I hate to kind of bring up my sister, but she chose her path, and even being raised, they can still leave. It's a choice. So I pray to God that she gets her head on straight, but we'll see in time. She has her life, so even that's not guaranteed though. So I'd like to kind of start wrapping things up a little bit. I'm going to probably spend the rest of the majority of the rest of the time, we're going to go back to Proverbs. Probably going to start here in chapter 1 and read the first 7 verses. I just kind of want to use the introduction of Proverbs just as an introduction to what I'm getting ready to kind of talk about. So here in Proverbs 1:1 reads, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Unfortunately, I've actually seen verse 7 a lot too, and even in the church. I know everybody has their hang-ups, but it's one of the best things anybody can do is open their mind to the fact that they do have the problems. Essentially, it's like Psychology 101. The first step to curing yourself is admitting you have the problem. But too often, it's really easy to just pass it off and say, "Oh, it's not a big deal." But what about those around you? I didn't quite go into this in my notes, so I can't really think of anything off the top of my head to actually go and read, because it's funny the way your different directions your mind goes when you're actually up here talking. But that alone is something that everybody needs to try to keep in mind, especially the little eyes, the kids. It doesn't matter how old you are, they're watching. If they're around, they're watching. And if you're walking around doing anything, especially you shouldn't be, especially as a parent, just wait, because they will use it against you. I have heard it many, many times. Friends, family, in talking with them over the years, in the heat of the moment, it's really easy for especially your kids to look at you and go, "Well, you did it." You better be able to say why you regret it, or they're going to turn around and they're going to burn you with it. It's going to happen every time. And you better genuinely be remorseful. Otherwise, you are setting them up for failure and heartache and unnecessary pain. So again, just try to keep these in mind as we jump to Proverbs 2, verses 1 through 11. Which is probably, depending on how your Bible set up, probably there on the next page. Try to get into some of this wisdom from Solomon, the wisest man the world's ever seen, and we are lucky enough to have his thoughts here. Pretty cool when you think about it along that line, especially considering the fact that it's lasted 4,000 years or so. Interesting to a history buff. Okay, 2 and verse 1, and I'll be reading through 11. "My son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom and incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice, and he preserves the way of his godly ones. Then you will discern righteousness and justice, and equity in every good course. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will guard you, understanding will watch over you." And really, if you read there all the way through 2, he just kind of gives kind of the flip thought on things, essentially what to look out for in the opposite of trying to stand up for good. If you let all the wrong things in, it's really hard to take it back. It's really hard to get that out of your mind. You let things in that you shouldn't. it takes a lot to turn away from it. When if you would have just avoided it in the first place, you don't have the problem. That is one of the simplest things you can ever say. And I always kind of remember one of my dad's stories about, I think he was working at one of the warehouses when he was younger. And a bunch of the people there on the line were talking essentially about how they all got drunk over the weekend, and asked him what he did. And he's like, well, I didn't drink. They're like, why? He's like, I don't drink. I never have. And there was one particular woman who simply could not believe the fact that he had never drank. And if I remember right, it all stemmed from them asking, or no, he had mentioned, that's what it is. He had mentioned the secret to never getting drunk. Don't drink. And that woman just flipped. She literally could not believe it. But sometimes it's as simple as that. If you don't drink, you can't get drunk. If you don't smoke marijuana, you can't get high. And that one blows my mind. How many people try to pass that one off as good, and yet, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks back, a girl was high and ran her car into somebody's house because she was dumb enough to get in the car and drive, and wound up killing 2 minors. That family now is missing 2 children because she was dumb enough to think it was okay to get high because all her friends were doing it. But how many times, especially there in the presence of friends, and this one, go off on this little tangent. Now, this is fun. I get the soapbox. Especially as parents, this is again something I've seen a lot of. It's okay to look at your children and say, no, you can't be around them anymore. They're corrupting your influence. How many problems have kids have, especially seemingly in their teenage years when they're trying to figure everything out? I even remember this on my own personal level. I had a best friend, ironically his name was Josh, since 2nd grade, practically inseparable. And then come high school, I can remember going out to the movies one time, and we had some other friends that were going to karate with us, and I had kind of suspected some of this because I hadn't really been around it and seen it very much. But they started cursing in the middle of the theater and being loud and just plain annoying. And I actually confronted him over it afterward, and I'm like, if you're going to continue on this path, I cannot stay. I'm like, it doesn't matter to me that we've been best friends since 2nd grade. If you're going to stray from the truth and go your own way and act this way, I'm not doing it. And it wound up being a couple months later, he just gone, just poof, that fast. Those years and years and years of playing together and spending the night at one another's houses, playing games, going out to the movies, you name it, we did it together. He even attended church with us. We'd pick him up, come with us. Meant nothing. Not when it came down to him deciding to do what he wanted to do. And you know what? If I would have stuck around him, it's only a matter of time. Bad company corrupts good morals. It's that simple. And again, from a parental standpoint, my sister, ironically, is a good example of this. And there was a point where with one of her boyfriends, Dad just had to sit her down and say, no, you're done. He's a corrupting influence, and until you get over him, you're essentially going to be at my side. He had to actually go that far. It's okay to go that far. Actually, fathers and mothers, it's your responsibility to watch over your children. Fathers, you're the shield. Use it. You can't just stand by all the time and let them experience life. No, that's this modern hippie mindset. You're going to cause them to stumble in ways where you could have avoided it, rather than teaching them the truth. Get them to learn to stand on their own 2 feet so they can make the decision, so you don't have to. that when they come and ask you why they shouldn't do this or why they should do this, have the answer. Or if you have to, like I said, you may, if it really comes down to it, you may have to step in and tell them why before they know to ask. It's your responsibility. Do it. Use it, because you'll be held accountable for it. As will I, if I ever get to that point. Turn over one more page to Proverbs 3. This one's going to be kind of a longer reading. I'm going to read 1 through 18. Again, this is just kind of keeping with the theme of kind of reading some of the wisdom from Solomon and essentially just, you got to keep your mindset of you want to stay and stick with the truth. You stay and stick with the truth, it's a whole lot easier to look and identify what you shouldn't do. So again, starting here in verse 1 and reading through 18. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace will add to you. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding. For her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her gain better than fine gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. Long life is in her right hand, and her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who hold her fast. Can't say a whole lot more than that, really. Solomon's a pretty wise dude. He's essentially just saying here, really, it's almost kind of a repeat to a degree of what he just said in the second chapter. Seek the truth. It's our responsibility to do it. It's been that way since the dawn of time. Even in Adam and Eve, we're responsible for trying to uphold truth, and look what happened when they decided to stray from it. Let one serpent change the course of their lives and everyone after them, which I have a feeling God knew very well that was going to happen in his infinite wisdom of things. But when that happened, they started asking why. So God had to lay it out. And now here we have before us in our hands and accessible to us in many means today, we have these truths. It's our responsibility to be able to answer the why when somebody asks. So you're going to have to open your Bibles, you're going to have to look through it. That's the only way you're going to know how to answer why. No matter who asks, be it someone from another congregation, or if you have to stand before an elder somewhere and tell them why, because they don't want to hear it. It's a hard thing to do, but it's our responsibility. Or if it's one of the little ones, they're going to ask why, because they're trying to figure it out. So we've got to be able to tell them. And it's not just the parents. They come to any one of us. Like I said the other day at the lot, I got a lot of why from Lily and James, and it was interesting. So I'd like to close here with one last reading. This is in Ecclesiastes 12, 9 through 14. This has all kind of worked out, because this has just been stuff that I've been mulling around in my head for months. I can turn to it. Okay. Again, that's Ecclesiastes 12, 9 through 14. Kind of close with this. Essentially the end here of the book of Ecclesiastes, which reads in verse 9, in addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. The words of wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So I kind of figured the ending here of Ecclesiastes was just a good ending in general, because that really does sum everything up. Especially if you watch a lot of movies and things, you see a lot of people kind of ponder, what is the meaning of life? Solomon just said it. Fear God and keep his commandments. That is quite literally the meaning of life. And then you also kind of get a warning before it, not to go too deep into devoting yourself to books, because essentially it'll just drive yourself nuts. So there's a happy medium between it all. You got to be able to live and enjoy yourself. That's part of the reason we're here. You can't go around just being a mopey dope all day long. It's no fun and nobody likes you. So just remember that. Fear God and keep his commandments. And in order to keep his commandments, you're going to have to study, and then you will be able to answer the why. I'd like to thank everybody for tolerating me. So at this time, have Mac give us our song, and if anybody needs to come forward or needs help with anything, I can give it a shot, although you just have to see where it goes. So have everybody stand, and we'll go ahead and have our song.
Have thine affections been nailed to the cross? Is thy heart right?